So what's the best way to remember your wife's birthday? Forget it once. So this is Shabbat Zachor, Shabbat of remembrance, of remembering. And we already talked a little about what it means. We are supposed to remember Amalek. Amalek was this nation that attacked us from the back as soon as we crossed the Red Sea. No reason, they attacked from the back. There is no warning, it's just happened. And in our tradition, we have that Amalek and the Amalekites, and we read already on the Haftarah that was so well chanted about this situation with, there is something about these people of Amalek. Now, in the spiritual part of this, the Kabbalists have identified that the word Amalek has the same gematria, the same numerology of the word Safek. Safek means doubt. So in the spiritual world, in the spiritual realm, what they want us to work on is who's this enemy or this arch-enemy that is always there. It's the Lex Luthor of Superman, right? That is always there. And what the Kabbalists are saying is this is also exactly what happened in our lives. When God is not there is when we have doubt. When God is there, you have faith, you have emunah, you have bitachon, you have faith, you trust. As soon as you have a doubt, there's no God in the equation, then your own enemy attacks you from the back. That's on one position over there that has to do with the spiritual realm. Now, but the question is, and no more than the question is, the Jewish people are very well known to be the people of remembrance. We have history, we have food, we have a language, we have a land, we have nation, we have a Torah that has almost 165, almost 200 times the word Zachor, to remember. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the day of Shabbat. Zachor yemot olam binu shnot dor vador. Remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past. Ask your parents who will inform you. Zachor et asher asa Adonai Elohecha leMiriam. Remember what your God Adonai did to Miriam. Remember, remember, remember. I think that Jewish people, we all have a PhD in remembrance, for sure. But the question is, what does it mean to remember? And I ask you, as you know, I like to ask you, what does it mean to remember to you?
To never forget.
Someone said something there? Remember? The people of Zoom here. What did he say? Remember what? Okay. Now I lost it. What does it mean to remember? Yes.
He said.
What did he say?
Do not repeat the same mistakes.
So remember in order to not repeat the same mistakes. Okay? Yes. What?
Memory is important as you get old. It fades.
Remember is important because?
When you're older, some of your memory fades.
Okay, so remember, or having reminders, when you are older, some of your memory fades. So it's good to remember because maybe it's a good mnemonic way, to really remember stuff, right? That you might otherwise forget. Anyone else? What's yes, Saul?
You have to remember the good times, so when you have bad times, they can carry you through to a better time.
Okay, so you have to remember the good times, when you have bad times, at least you have a good image or you have a good memory or a good remembrance of something that is good, just to kind of like soothe it a little bit, right? To smooth it out a little bit. Yes?
Remember where you put things so that you know to go back to get it.
Again, remember?
Remember where you put your things so when you go to look for it, you know where you put it.
So remember where you put your things, so you when you're looking for this, then you know what they are. Yes? So remember the day of Shabbat, and sanctify it. Okay, good. What else? Yes? To remember in order to commemorate, or remembering, like, for example, when your birthday is, or to commemorate your side, to, right? I mean, other special events or milestones in your life. Yes?
Turn it around and remember means don't forget.
Okay, so now we're getting into turning around, and remember means don't forget. It's interesting because in this parasha it says specifically three things about, in the Maftir we just read, it uses the two of them. It says Zachor, remember, and at the end it says Lo tishkach, right? In the biblical way, or in Hebrew, it's modern, you would say Al tishkach, don't forget. So it's the same to say don't forget or to remember. You say that it seems that you can see it in different ways, have different point of view, almost saying the same thing, but rephrasing it or reframe it, right? Okay. So remember means also don't forget. Beth.
To connect us to the chain, the door the generations, and to know that you come from something, and to give you a moral compass to where you're going.
Okay, so remembering who you are, your lineage, your heritage, connect your chain from all your past, from all your ancestry, in order to have a more of Ledor Vador, the passing, and knowing where you're going, knowing who you are from the past. Something like that? Yes?
But don't distort the facts.
The what? Don't distort the facts. Could you elaborate more? So remember the way it really was. Don't exaggerate it. Don't minimize it or belittle it. That's a great exercise for everyone, to remember exactly how it was. That's why we write journals. Then you go back to the journal, to your diary, and then you can read exactly how it was. Now we film everything, so you cannot really make it up. I cannot say whatever I said because now it's on Facebook. People will go to Facebook and say, you didn't say that. Right? So remember the way it was. Why is it so important for you to remember the way it was and not to make pluses or minuses to the story?
It's amazing how many times you think you remember the way it was. Three people experienced exactly the same thing, and each one looked at it differently.
Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well said. Someone here in the Zoom was saying something. Was it Michael? What? What Arnie says is that it's exactly what idea that you remember it the way it was, because you might ask different people and each person might remember in a different way, right? And it's important to really keep straight the story, because you can distort it. The distortion can lead into something else which is not desired sometimes. Is something like that, Arnie? Yes? Anyone else? Now, okay, we did exercise of remembering. I'm sure today you are probably remembering a lot of things. I'm probably talking about remembrance and talking about Zachor, or do not forget, or not forgetting something, or be not forgetful. You are probably remembering something right now. You don't need to share with me. You can save it for yourself. It's fine. But I know that at least when I hear someone talking and then I say, okay, what is it that I'm remembering right now? Or that reminded me of something else, or that. The question is, and also remembrance comes differently for different people in different ways. The way, like Arnie just said, there are three different people, they might remember in a different way. And also they might tell you the same story based on their reaction to that event, the way they remember it. And now we're going to just really talk a lot about that for a second, but I want to point out something that Professor Dr. Burke, remember he was here 2 weeks ago? I remember when people ignore me. It's fine. No. I will make a point on that. So now, Dr. Burke said something, because when we were having the lunch and learn, it was his third talk, and he was into question and QA. He was into questions and answers, and people were asking questions. And then someone, I don't know if it was Margot, someone was talking to him about, no, someone else, but they were talking specifically about how the new generation, because he's a professor in college, so he sees kids in campus and kids who are from 18 to 22 years old. That means, he said, they were born probably in between 2000 and 2004. And someone in the room was a little frustrated that why our generation, the new generations, that don't remember the way we remember. They don't have attachments that we have. And he explained a little bit, getting into, guys, remember, these kids were born in between 2000 2004, right? Some of them even had an idea what 9/11 was. Some had no idea. But for sure, they are from this century. They had no idea what happened in Israel or how the state was. They don't know anything about the wars, the 67 or the 73 or even the 82, nothing. I mean, and they have no relationships also with sometimes even with the Shoah or the Holocaust. So when we get into Yom HaZikaron and we get in, which is also a day of remembrance, our Memorial Day in the Jewish tradition, and we get into Yom HaAtzmaut and we get to Yom HaShoah, and we do the pew reviews from Brandeis University and these professors and De La Pergola and Professor Sarna and everyone gets there, the answer of these kids is, I have no connection with Israel. No, everyone. But there's a huge amount of kids who don't react the same we react because they don't have the same memories. They do it differently. And that's important to understand a little bit because sometimes we need to give the people the choice, as everyone has a free will, to also remember they want to remember or the way it's good for them to remember, not the way that we as the adults or the elders in the congregations or in the community or as parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, we would like them to remember. So we force them sometimes, we show them movies, we terrify them with different information, and sometimes these generations, not that they don't get it, but there is something in them, and that's for another remarks and sermon, they really don't want to remember the same way we remember.
They can't.
They can't, it says. Thank you. They can't. That's why I have Zoom next to me. I have also comments there. Now, let's analyze just 3 different levels very shortly, 3 different levels of how we human beings get usually remember things. And because you know that we have been learning a little bit throughout the last 3 months about the different levels of the soul, they also are related to the way also we remember. They're related in everything we do in life. So we're talking about, as a reminder again, remember that the Jewish soul, according to our tradition, we have 5 different levels of the soul. We have the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, chaya, and yechida. I'm not going to quiz you, I'm not going to test you on this. The only thing I want you to remember, we have 5 different levels of the soul. 3 of them live in this vehicle, which is our body. And they are related, even if you want to compare or make an analogy to psychology, will be our inner child or the ego, our adult, right? And then the godly part of us, which would be our neshama, the higher self. So how a nefesh, how an ego will make remembrance, how they will go towards remembrance. How do you think an ego will go through remembrance? You need to guess. I'll tell you. Usually, the ego in an episode, especially if the episode was not the best of them, usually it's a protagonist. Usually it's the main character. That means actually it becomes a victim, right? So thinking about Esther, let's put it there to the facts of the book of Esther because that's what we are remembering right now. Remember Amalek, remember Haman, right? So we are the victims. That means actually we remember through pain, through anger, through sadness, through disappointments, upsetness, resentments. We relive the story. It's okay to remember, but if you do it from the lowest part of yourself, the lowest part of even your spiritual and your psychological part of yourself, that means that you are remembering from the victimization, from the victim role. Everyone gets that? Yes? Raise your hands if you have been there, where you remember and say, they did this to me, and they did this to me, everyone, right, of course. Because that's kind of the most instinct reacting point, where everyone, it's the first thing you react is, they did this to me, right? And as a Jewish nation also, we have that they did this to us. And in the story of Esther, look, Haman wanted to kill us, right? So we become the victims. Now, let's go now because if you remember in this level, right, everything is related to negative emotions and what it also is called the limited quality emotions. It's limiting you because you don't really live that role of victim It's very difficult to really move on. Every time that the episode comes, you remember the chaos. You remember just the way it was on your point of view as a victim. Now, let's move on into the Ruach. So the Ruach now becomes the adult of us. The adults, usually, we are supposed to take responsibility. And when we take responsibility, that means that we now can look at the story in a different way. Why in this world I was subject to that matter? I was the subject in that story, in that event, right? So let's put, for example, the story of Esther. I don't know if you know, but the Kabbalah per se, and the Kabbalists have explained. People say, how in this world we have a Haman, another Amalekite, someone who comes from the people of Amalek, who wants to harm us once again. Why in this world? Well, I don't know if you remember the beginning of the story, which you're going to be reading on Monday night and also probably on Tuesday morning or at noon. That part of the story is that the king Ahasuerus did a banquet. Remember for how many days? 180 days. That makes how much in the year? It's half of a year, 6 months, right? Now, believe it or not, there were Jewish people there. And the big rabbis, in Shushan, and a lot of people who were the big machers in Shushan, they were in that party as well. So what do you think that those big machers were doing? Drinking kosher wine? You think they were like covering their eyes when the other Vashtis or the other, strippers were dancing? No. Do you think that they refrained from sexual interactions? They did not. So they were participating in all that as well. Their mind, as what we are supposed to follow the laws and the commandments and the Torah, all the laws of purity were all violated. In a way, what the Kabbalists are saying is that you get what you are, or you are, right? What does it mean? You get a governor, right, or a minister like Haman because your level of consciousness is at that level. You created this monster. Your behavior created this monster, right? In the case of Esther, this is what more or less what the Kabbalists are saying, that they were the ones who created that in the spiritual realm and became physically as Haman hating the Jews. Now, what happened now if we step up on one more level, which is the neshama now, right? We went through the nefesh, the ego, now the adult, the ruach, and now we're going to the neshama. So what does it mean to remember from the point of view of a neshama? In a way, humanity now has matured. So instead of just being the victim or just taking responsibilities, now it's time of action. And you do something about it. You take action, you do something about it, you apply your godly part of yourself. You do something about it. Don't wait for supernatural miracles, right? And you act on your own. You try to repair, to create tikkun olam, to repair something about the situation. In the case of Esther, what was that repairing? What was that tikkun? The 3 days of fasting. Esther was petrified. She didn't want to really say who she was. She didn't want to pull out and reveal who she was. Until she did, things turned around, and now Esther asked Mordecai for all the Jewish people to fast for 3 days. That fasting became the reparation and the tikkun for what it was going to be the future outcome, which is that the Jewish people were very happy. Now, I don't know how many of you, now that we analyze a little of the levels of how we can remember, and I'm sure that all of us, you have been in the 3 different levels. Most of the time, we are very much into the nefesh, into the ego level. At times, we take responsibilities, but very little we are into this idea of the neshama, the godly of ourselves, to really watch the remembrance on that level from the balcony, from the drone, and in a more altruistic way. I want to know how many of you know that the rabbis, there is a midrash, a very important midrash in the tradition that says that when the Messianic era will arrive, the only holiday that's going to continue being celebrated is Purim. Raise your hands, how many have heard that? Good. So when the Messiah comes, Mashiach comes, the Messianic era, there's not going to be any other holiday to be celebrated other than Purim. Except for Purim, anything else will not longer exist. No Rosh Hashanah, no Yom Kippur, no nothing. And I want you to read, just to finalize and to, my remarks today about this. They asked this question to many rabbis, but there's one rabbi in particular that Marcela and I found, who is Rabbi Ari Shvat, and he answers the following, and I want you to share this with you. It's a short answer, but very poignant, and hopefully we all can take something out of this beautiful answer. It says, the source in the ancient Midrash, which on his sides, Midrash Mishle, says that in the end of days, all the holidays will cease except for Purim. And even Rabbi Elazar in the Talmud says also Yom Kippur will be ceased to be celebrated. As with many Midrashim, it is unclear whether it is meant to be taken literally, but the message is what's important. As you know, Rabbi Shvat says, Esther is unique in that it's the only book in the Tanakh, in the whole Bible, without God's name. God is not mentioned even once. God made the miracle and salvation there from behind the scenes. As the last book canonized into the Bible, God stopped doing supernatural miracles already 2,400 years ago, enabling man to have more free will. Just as a parent gradually teaches his child independence, that's how God treated mankind. Like children, primitive man needed supernatural miracles and guidance, and their free will had to be relatively supervised and limited. Over history, mankind has matured, and God can hide himself or herself more, although he or she secretly always supervises, and grant us more and more independence. Our rabbis are teaching us that in the end of the days, the Purim type of miracle will be that which we celebrate, and not the supernatural type like Pesach or Shavuot. For we will ourselves be godly and responsible enough and mature enough to remember to recognize and thank God, even if he or she isn't as apparent as during the olden days. As we enter the Messianic era, with the return of Israel and the ingathering of the exiles, it is already important that we ourselves act godly. Don't rely and wait for supernatural miracles, and remember to thank God for helping us help ourselves through, for example, the Balfour's declarations, revival of Hebrew and the wilderness, the desert, Entebbe, Aliyah of Soviet Jewry, and celebrating religiously Israel Independence Day, commemorating the War of 48 and Yom Yerushalayim, and also the 6-Day War. So I ask you, on this Shabbat, Zachor, Shabbat of remembrance, where do you remember from? Where do you decide to remember from? And finally, what level will be the one to benefit all humanity? Shabbat Shalom.